Assalamu alaikum, my dear friends. Last week I read an article, I saw it on social media, that a guy came home and as he was approaching his house, a police vehicle with a couple of cops in there stopped him and walked up to him, and they were in full police uniform and their car had the markings of a police car also. But these were in fact criminals, and they were dressed in police uniforms and even had their car camouflaged or colored in the color of a police car. And they proceeded to invade his home and to, I don't know what, all sorts of crimes they committed there, and then made off with the loot and with whatever damage they did. And this guy was completely traumatized. And this is the tone, this is the more or less the gist of this posting on WhatsApp. I think I saw it. So the idea is usurping, the police, the idea of the cops dressing up like them, appearing like them. And I want to make the analogy, between that type of usurpation of a lawful and legitimate authority with the idea of al-ishraku billah, shirk in the Qur'an. And because it is the supreme and the highest transgression as spelled out in the Qur'an. In fact, the Qur'an states here in this one verse, it says, God does not pardon the sin of co-option with him, but will pardon anything else if he chooses. The one who co-opts any false authority with God has perpetrated the ultimate sin. And so that is really the idea that comes to mind when you see these guys impersonating policemen, is really the sin. And the problem that we have today with shirk is people impersonating God, or impersonating or invoking the authority of God, saying that they speak for God when they have no such authority. And it is a very common occurrence, especially with religions, all religions. There's always the temptation of those who are respected and given at least some measure of authority to invoke and to start to pronounce in the name of God. And I don't think people realize that, the priest, the doctor, the scientist, whoever they are, that they are committing the ultimate breach of trust between them and their God by invoking God for their own desires. You see, there's a difference between being a spiritual person and being a superstitious person. And what religions have done, and especially the mainstream religions, including Islam in most of its varieties, is that they have replaced spiritual enlightenment with superstition. So they've effectively convinced you that to do stupid things are in service of God, are carrying out the will of God, when they are in fact the people who wrote those silly rules and superstitions. You see, the Qur'an is a very compact, concise book. It's only got 6,200 verses. If you had to write it down in English, it would be a very, very modestly sized book. I guess less than a general Shakespeare play. I mean, it's readable within, I would say, a day or two. You could read it from cover to cover. If you read non-stop, you could read the entire text. And so that is the will of God. That is, in those 6,200 verses, with a finite number of rules, is vested the divine ordinances, the divine code. And that's it. But now, the usurpers of God's authority, the priests, the popes, the bishops, the Maulanas, the Ayatollahs, it's not enough for them, you see. It's not enough for them to render you or to guide you towards those 6,200 edicts or pronouncements in the Quran. They need to augment those rules with rules which they've invented. And they invent elaborate rationalizations for their imposition. Like they come up with hadith stories which number in the hundreds of thousands. Many, many, many times more than the Quran. You know, all these books here would not be equivalent to the amount of hadiths you get. And then the Quran is, as I said, 6,300. So they flood the word of God with their own ideas, which they invent a rationalization for. And that is really the problem that we deal with. And that is the cause why there is such a thing as atheism today. You see, there wouldn't be atheism if you didn't get a flood of superstition flooding the idea of religion. Now, what is superstition? What is superstition? Superstition is any knowledge that is not based on evidence or on any rational and logical deduction. So if you did not apply rational and logical thinking, and if you did not find any evidence in the real world or in the divine text, then it is superstition, my friends. Then it is superstition. If somebody tells you you've got to kiss the black rock, it's something that is amazing, it's just superstition if there's no proof to it. If there's no proof to that action, then it is a superstitious action. Then it is the same as the Christian who believes in having the effigy or the statue of Jesus on the cross as something that has some sort of divine value. It is the same. And no matter how bad you feel about it, no matter how offended you feel about it, if it's not based in the divine text, which is the only divine text is the Quran, and there are aspects of divinity in other texts, but there's been a compromise of those texts, unfortunately. The only pristine divine text is the holy text, right? And then the only other thing that could compare with that is the evidence, the real empirical evidence, and any rational and logical deduction that you make. Anything else is superstition. And the problem with religion is that they have flooded your belief in God with 90% of what you do is superstition, if it's not based on the text of the Quran. And you know what superstition is? Superstition, if you accept it as equivalent to the will of God, if you accept superstitious beliefs, for example, if you believe that a person must be stoned to death for committing adultery, which is a superstition, it is obviously not in the Quran, and there's no rational basis to it. There's no rational basis to killing somebody for committing a sin, such a ghastly, cruel and violent death for something that somebody did that did not involve any violence. You see, the act of adultery does not involve violence. It is a moral indiscretion. But yet there is such an overwhelmingly cruel and violent punishment. It's not rational, it's not logical, and it's not in the Quran. So if you believe in it, then you are in fact following superstition. But if you believe that it is divine, then you have committed the ultimate sin. Then you have committed the sin of ishrak billah. And what it says here is God does not pardon the sin of co-option with him. You have now co-opted authorities outside of the written, authorized manuscript and text that has been issued officially by the messenger of God to you, namely the Quran. If you now invoke a testament, a body of literature, a discourse, a hadith other than the hadith that is authorized and divine, then you have committed al-ishraku billah, shirk, and there is no forgiveness for you, my dear friends. And I pray so for people that are unable to see the simple logical position that I'm presenting to you is, if you accept any superstition, any man-made rule or law as divine, you have committed ishrak billah. You have committed the sin of shirk, because you have compromised the law of God.